And global protests connecting the world with little sign of calming down as we, well, tick down towards a new decade. Well, the end point of these movements, quite frankly, is unknown. But when looking into a crystal ball, at least in the mind of my next guest, one thing is clear. This is just the start of what is to come. People feeling irrelevant against power, fighting to have their voices heard before it is too late. Author Yuval Noah Harari is one of the greatest minds of our time. Last hour, he told me there will be no return if we go down the path of a digital dictatorship. Now, in part two of our conversation, he reflects on the skills we need, or we certainly will need, to survive this 21st century.
What we've seen over the last few years is people losing faith in the story of liberal democracy, and it's not absolutely clear why, because actually the last 20 or 30 years, under the protection of the global liberal order, were the best times in history for humankind. In the 20th century, we had a big battle between three stories: the communist story, the fascist story, and the liberal story. And the fascist story was knocked out in the Second World War, and for something like 30 years, we had just one story to explain the past and to guide us to the future. And now this story is collapsing. We are left with a vacuum, zero stories, which is the most frightening situation to be in. The vacuum is tentatively filled by all kinds of nostalgic fantasies, nationalist fantasies, religious fantasies. But what is common to all these fantasies? They don't offer any viable vision for the world as a whole, and they don't offer any viable vision for the future. The only thing we know for certain is that by 2050, the world will be completely different from today. It's really the first time in history that we have no idea what a job market would look like in 30 years, what skills people will need in 30 years. There will be jobs. Some jobs will disappear, but new jobs will emerge and other jobs will be transformed. And we just don't know how and what skills will be needed, which is really frightening, because this is a question we need to answer now, not in 20 or 30 years. We need to know what to teach kids today in school or in college.
What do we teach children today?
The most important skill is how to keep learning and keep reinventing yourself throughout your life, which means you need, above all else, a lot of emotional intelligence and a lot of mental flexibility. How to keep reinventing yourself repeatedly throughout your life, because the big struggle in the 21st century will not be against exploitation, like in the 20th century. It will be against irrelevance. How do I stay relevant to this fast-moving world?
Yuval, what happened in 2016? You talk about a useless class, sort of looking back through the prism of nostalgia and the rise of sort of populism and nationalism. The result, what happened?
So I think part of what happened in 2016 in many parts of the world is that, you know, even people who don't follow the latest developments in AI and bioengineering and all these big words, machine learning and the big data and all these things, they are correctly sensing that they are in danger of becoming irrelevant, and they are revolting against that and saying, hey, we still have a lot of power, at least the power of mayhem, and they have succeeded in capturing the attention of everybody. I think that the real problem is that to deal with any of the major issues we are facing, we need to do it on a global level, and we are running in the opposite direction.
Yuval, what keeps you up at night?
I try to sleep well. I don't like to stay awake at night if I don't have to. I think that my main worries are more like these cosmic or philosophical worries. I think that we are really facing a philosophical bankruptcy, that we don't have the ideas or the outlook to really deal with the powers that we are acquiring. You know, the basic deal between philosophers and politicians has always been that philosophers have these fancy ideas how to change the world, change humanity, and the politicians come and say, well, we don't have the means to realize your ideas, sorry very much. But now it's the opposite situation. The politicians will soon get into their hands the technology to create heaven or hell, but the philosophers are having difficulty conceptualizing the new heaven and the new hell fast enough. These questions are now migrating from the Department of Philosophy to the Department of Engineering. And whereas philosophers are very, very patient people, they can discuss an issue for thousands of years and not agree on an answer and be okay with it. Engineers are impatient, and the people who pay the engineers are even more impatient. If you want to put a self-driving vehicle on the road, you need to solve all kinds of ethical dilemmas and issues about free will that has been argued about for thousands of years, but you want to do it next year or in 5 years. So I think now, if the philosophers don't do their job, the engineers will do that job too, and that's very dangerous.